Okay. Thanks everybody for joining. We're going to do more capital campaign talk this morning. I think a lot of the conversation today has been an attempt to walk the line between the big picture and the weeds. And so often, I mean, we all are curious and we all, I think, want to get into the weeds. So part of the struggle has been keeping people above that to talk about the vision and where we want to go. But today is an opportunity to get down in the weeds a little bit, to ask questions and look at some of the lists that have been assembled through a lot of hard work, mainly by the Buildings and Grounds Committee over the last year. So I want to start just acknowledging, could folks that are here that are members of either the Visioning Committee or the Buildings and Grounds Committee raise your hands? Okay, so these people are resources for all of us. I'm actually going to be leaning on Buildings and Grounds folks as we encounter questions or elaboration, because those are the folks who've done a lot of the homework here. I'm going to start though with a mea culpa. This is very difficult for me. So in April, when we had the seminar with Jill White, the consultant, I came away from that seminar with the $10,000 number in my head. It's going to cost $10,000 to do a feasibility study. As Jill White reminded us when several of us met with her on Thursday, the actual value is 1.8% of the previous year's pledges, which I must have just done quick math in my head in that seminar and carried that number forward. The actual number is $15,000. And I'm sick about that because I brought incorrect information to the congregation, and I'm very sorry about that. Bromley and I are going to be working to raise that additional $5,000 outside of the annual budget because we agreed on a number as a congregation, and that seemed like the best path forward. Elda? I appreciate it.
Get the list out, Tim, quick.
If only all my terrible mistakes were met with applause, that would, yeah. Anyway, y'all are awesome. All right, so timeline where we are. We agreed at the congregational meeting to do a feasibility study, which I just talked about briefly. We had an initial meeting with the consultant, and she's going to give us a contract. And part of our job is to come up with a list of folks to interview for that. Now, she will have about 40 time slots. Those will be 1-hour time slots. Couples or families can meet in those time slots, but she said for a congregation of our size, sort of 40 time slots is about what she shoots for. So that'll be anywhere between 40 and 80 people, depending on how many people are in each of those time slots. The committee will be working on assembling essentially as representative a list of folks to schedule for those as we can. We do that, for instance, when we populate CMRB. That's a committee that we attempt to have a representative group of folks on there, representative in terms of, stage in life, representative in terms of background, representative in terms of children or not. This is sort of that plus, because we need all of those sort of demographic things, but we also need things like folks that maybe will have the capability of giving large amounts of money, folks that maybe, aren't in that kind of a position, folks who were pretty sure are in favor of a capital campaign, folks who were pretty sure are not in favor of a capital campaign at this time. So we'll be working on assembling a list like that. And I'm happy on this or anything that we talk about today to take any questions or comments that you have. Just feel free to email me with any of that. So any questions about the feasibility study? Those will be, online interviews. Those interviews will be by Zoom. Yes. Other questions about the feasibility study? Okay, as we then discussed at the congregational meeting, once that feasibility study is concluded, we'll come back to the congregation at a special congregational meeting with the results of that study. What the gist or the take home of that report is what is the likelihood of success given those interviews that she's made? What's the likelihood of success? And we've asked her to sort of condition that on a range of potential goals, ranging from 1.5 million up to something larger. So she will sort of help us, by gathering input from everybody, will help us to maybe zone in on what the sweet spot is in terms of high probability of success for a particular goal. Okay, yes, Beth.
Interviews, or will there be I don't know, looking at other groups that are raising money in Gainesville, just other kinds of
other folks online? Okay, so I'll repeat questions so we don't have to pass the mic at this point. So the question was, does that consulting bit, the feasibility bit, include an assessment of local conditions outside of the church? No. So it's just an assessment of folks in the church. Certainly, people in the church bring all of that to those interviews in terms of the economy, in terms of the possibility of grants, in terms of many other things. Yeah. Other questions about that report or the feasibility study? If based on that report, the congregation decides to move forward with a capital campaign, we will do it. And that'll be, a several-month campaign that'll be carried out with a committee that's different than this visioning committee that's sort of been working to this point. There'll probably be some overlap in people, but that will be a different committee. At the end, we'll have pledges from that intense campaign part, but those pledges will be fulfilled over a period of years, where that number is something that the capital committee will decide on. In our conversations with the consultant on Thursday, she suggested for the size of campaign we're talking about, typically the period would be closer to 5 years. So that obviously is really a really important number in terms of people thinking about, okay, what is our capability to give to a capital campaign, thinking about the period of time you have to fulfill it. So it'll probably be closer to 5-year fulfillment period rather than 3. Okay. It's exciting, to think about where we might be, at this phase. We will have a lot of moving forward because we have lots of lists. So that background. Go to the next slide, Tristan. Couple of things to remember when we talk about projects. There's the essential repairs and improvements, which are sort of what we would consider things that really need to be done to bring our facilities to the point where they should be. And then visionary projects, which are sort of over and above after we've sort of taken care of this business. We'll not vote on the actual campaign and goal until we see the results of the study. Any dollars raised over and above the essential repairs and improvements goal will go to visionary project projects, but those projects will be chosen through some kind of collaborative congregational process. Okay. And then any campaign we do will include a tithe for some kind of mission and justice programming, more outward facing work. Okay. Last time we did a large capital campaign, we built a habitat house. So that was an example of that kind of mission giving. Okay. Any questions about any of that? Yes, Carol.
And she goes to the microphone. And you just answer. You said that a project
There's people online, so.
said that a visionary project would be chosen through a collaborative process. So if I came up to you and said, I have $10,000 and I want this to happen, it would still have to go through, you wouldn't accept the $10,000 yet until we had approval from a committee?
I certainly, I mean, I can't answer to what the actual capital campaign committee and the group running that process would say, but I would think that, you know, this whole process is intended to be a congregational process, and that there should be some broad agreement on what we do. Now, whether donors choose to earmark particular projects or want to prioritize particular projects, I think that'll be something that the conversation they'll have to have with the people running the capital campaign. Is that an adequate answer? I guess
Somebody came up with,
I really want this thing to happen. Yeah.
to the church to bring it forward.
Yeah, that's I answered in my long way by saying, I'm not sure.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that would be a great eventuality that someone was wanting to do that.
I think in terms of openness to congregational input, it doesn't necessarily have to just be the things that we've already thought of. I do think that we've had in the past folks offer money for different projects, and the Board of Business just within the last couple of years developed a major gifts sort of policy. Is the word. And so because, you know, sometimes you're raising money for the foundation and somebody wants to give you something for a statue and you're like, no, thank you, you know, but so I think that I think that our process will need to involve lots of openness to congregational input, but also, you know, an assessment of our needs, and so we can leverage folks' generosity in ways that they can feel happy about, but also is serving the bigger mission of the church.
That may have been an impulsive question, because the more I think about it, the importance of sustainability as well. To have something come in and then not have the funds to maintain it or sustain it. So, sorry.
The other, another partial answer to your question might be that there may be some of these large visionary things that have subparts to them. And there may be a particular subpart that appeals particularly to you. An example would be the fountain, enhancement of the fountain, which would be a larger mission of the courtyard in general and whatnot. Possibility as well.
My question was about the 3 to 5 year fundraising pledge, when the pledges were actually going to be fulfilled. Before, when we had an urgent need, such as the roof, we ended up borrowing quite a large sum of money, and luckily we're able to pay that back through pledging. And I was just curious, because these are essential repairs and improvements, if the Buildings and Grounds Committee has thought about that. Are we waiting till this all gets in the bank? Are we going to borrow money, assuming that we're going to have the pledges? How that might work?
We haven't really talked about cash flow. I mean, my quick reaction, and there certainly are people who have thought about this more, is that I don't think we would anticipate borrowing money. I think most of the things on the list are essential, but aren't the roof is literally falling down essential. So many of the things can wait, 3 to 5 years. If the money comes in relatively evenly, then we'd have about a fifth of that each year. And it's going to take a while to have contractors work through that list. So I anticipate that 5 years is not a bad sort of period of time to sort of have that money flowing in, because we're not going to get this, oh my God, list done that's here, in a year. It's just not possible. So I think that flow of money over a long 5-year period actually will work well with regard to implementation.
Just question, comment. I don't think we've actually paid off that other loan, right? The $100,000 loan, I think is for the roof. I mean, it's still a loan, right?
It's a loan,
So
and we're
what-
paying it from the budget. It's like
the mortgage.
it's like our mortgage.
It's a mortgage.
Yeah. So many questions before we get to the weeds.
Yeah, I just had two observations. One is that obviously what you're talking about is sequencing of projects. Projects build upon each other sometimes, and other times there are projects that are more acute than others, like the roof falling in. And so sequencing is important, and to make it clear, I think, eventually what kind of sequences to expect in terms of our
Yeah, sequencing is important, and buildings and grounds have put an enormous amount of thought into that.
great.
So that, believe me,
That's
that
what I
is
want to hear.
foremost
Yeah.
in their mind.
And
You
the
don't
other,
want to be opening walls, doing a thing, closing the walls, and then opening the walls.
right,
So-
yeah. And I always think about investment, of course, which is why I contributed to solar, for example. That saves us money every month, actually. So anything that can help reduce future expenditures is something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the 3 sort of main motivators we talked about at the congregational meeting was increasing our capacity to diversify our income streams so that we're less dependent just on pledge income. It's really important. What steps are being taken to ensure that we monitor buildings and grounds issues in the future? We have a buildings and grounds committee at the moment, and I suspect they will stay active for quite some time. I think this whole process has been really educational for the congregation. I think, the conversation that we had around the budget and around the capital improvements line, I think people get it. They understand where we are right now and what got us here. And I think we'll just keep that momentum going. And I think we likely will have a group that's paying attention to that, moving forward. I will point out that this has come up before. I remember working with Larry on questions like this back in the day. So, addressing long-term problems is a long-term thing we've worked on, but I think it's high in the congregation's consciousness now.
Okay. Let's get to the meat. Yeah.
Let's get to the meat. Can we get the next? I'm either not pointing. There we go. I've categorized things here into chunks. It's a little bit different than the chunking out that's in the narrative, but I just wanted to look at where the money was going to in terms of categories. And because I'm curious. And so this is the essential repairs and improvements. These are the dollars among these different categories. And, this is some people like pie charts, other people don't. Here's pie charts and percentages, but it does show, for instance, what is dominating those essential repairs and improvements. My goodness, parking lots. We are a car-dependent society. Our parking lots are decades old, and bringing them back up to snuff so that they're not sinking into the ground and falling apart at the edges is a civil engineering project. And civil engineering projects are expensive. And I'll be happy to share the PowerPoint in some way. I think that'll be important. So, that's a big chunk. I would say sort of most of the rest are sort of 5-figure chunks that are a little bit more evenly distributed among the rest of the categories: flooring and paint, HVAC, repiping, and so on. Okay. So, well, the first thing I did when I got this list was do this, and I said, "Oh my God, half of it's parking lots." So, parking lots. I wasn't sure about the best way to sort of do this. I sort of have a bunch of slides with each of these main categories. And because we have people in the know here, I thought it would be an opportunity for us to, as concisely as possible, address questions or concerns people have about each of these categories. So is there anything in particular that people want to talk about or address with regard to parking lots that's not sort of already summarized in the narrative?
I just want to be the grumpy old man that puts this out there at the beginning so we can have this to reference. And that is that look down the list, each one of them just seems enormously high. Like the expectations for the renovations we want in the parking lot, in the kitchen, whatever, just seem way, way out of bounds for the way I approach life, where I sort of fix things and occasionally renovate, but go slow and go cheaply. So I'm just going to say that up front.
Okay.
And I'm sure you'll have arguments why each one is necessary, but just glancing at it, it just seems really, really high.
I'll have 3 responses, and then others can respond. The first response is, have any of you hired a contractor recently? The second response is contractors are expensive. And the third, I'll lay this a little on you, Daryl, but more broadly, because, I had similar reactions when I looked at this list, but I think one thing that's important is I trust my fellow congregants, and folks have spent the last year doing some pretty intense work on these numbers. And we had some questions a long time ago about some of the initial estimates that seemed outrageous, and they actually, with further investigation, ended up being correct with regard to the local contracting market. So others may have better responses than that, but
One thing about the parking lot is handling the stormwater so that it's not just a paving problem or appropriate paving and such, but there's other things that need to be considered.
Beth?
I was gonna say, I think it's important to think about that this isn't a home that we're talking about. This is a public space that, in terms of liability and safety and, for people of all abilities to use the parking lot and to get through it, that it's, maybe comparing the contractors you might hire for your home driveway, it's different than when you're dealing with a public building.
It is tough. This is a distinction that Bromley has tried to make, sort of the difference between how we would deal with our home, how we might deal with an institution like UCG. Daryl, I am the cheapest man on earth. Just ask this woman right here. So I certainly have to step outside that when I look at these numbers. And I think the fact that this is an institution is one of those things. Yeah, Glenn?
I think the question is a valid one. You know, why are we spending so much? Embedded in each subject, since I was a part of building and grounds looking at this, there are liability concerns within a parking lot. There are code concerns. And an example of a code concern is over all these decades, our stormwater, even the ponds themselves, are the original size, but they have filled in. Our guess is about 12 inches of depth has been lost. So if we were to ever be visited by the city to look at it, it would be demanded of us to repair that sufficiently so that we're handling the stormwater. So one of the issues we're trying to do with each subject is there something else we can tackle and solve? And that's why I think the parking lot looks expensive, and to a certain extent, the courtyard numbers are shocking, but maybe this will come up, but there are other reasons for that, and there's a wide range that addresses the more modest to the quite big visionary.
But keep asking difficult questions. I know it's in your blood, but please do. Maybe these numbers are based on discussions with contractors. And Tony's saying maybe explain the sources for the estimate. So I'll let Liz maybe briefly describe the process where we arrived at these numbers.
Some of these estimates are just that. They're just soft estimates based on Carol's experience in the construction field. The parking lots, however, we did consult with HIP construction. There's like big guys, you go to the big guys to do parking lots. And so that is a very firm estimate. Now, when we go to do those kinds of projects, we would, of course, get other estimates. And we would learn more, because you learn a lot when you have these people come out and look at your situation. You learn things that you hadn't paid attention to, that also needs to be corrected or whatever. So we learn a lot by that. And then we come up with a scope of work. After we get all of those estimates, then we see, okay, here's what the scope of work should be. And then we bid it out. So this cost for the parking lots is a ballpark figure, but it's not unreasonable. It could be a little high. It might be a little low. And that's the way I think that we should think about this whole list, that overall, there are going to be some things that are going to be higher, and there are some things that are going to be lower. And we have to keep in mind that if this is spread out over a 3 to 5 year period, costs go up tremendously from year to year. And so, the sooner we can take care of these things, the better for us financially. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thanks, Liz. That's great. Ed?
So the church has been pretty good at seeing the parking lot as an asset, with our, game day parking, and I guess Publix people park there too during the week. Is there a means that we could get the people who can take advantage of it during the week to help fund part of this? And also, with this improvement, are we gaining more spaces, or I was just hoping to get the rosier side of things.
Well, I think indirectly Publix does pay, because that money goes into our operating budget. So that's always a good thing. And we're actually raising the rent this year. They've had it 2 years now at that price, and we're raising the rent. Yes, there will be, with the design of the parking lot that HIP came up with, we would gain, I think it was 3 to 5 additional parking places there. And then over here in the west lot, I think it was about the same. So we would have increased parking spaces, and that is because they would have curb stops for every place. And so people would know exactly where to park, and it wouldn't be so random as it is right now. Did that answer your question?
So glad you buildings and grounds folks are here. I think Carol is camping. God, well deserved. She got out of Dodge. Yeah. Other parking lot. Okay.
I guess I would just say this does, when you hear required list, it does, this is one of those where you can say, well, we get by for another year or two on the bumpy parking lot and deal with other stuff first. So you can prioritize stuff that needs to be done quicker than other stuff that doesn't need to be done so quickly.
Yeah. Even within this essential list, there's prioritization to be done and sequencing. So great points. Drainage and water management. So Glenn has already spoken to this, but our problems with drainage have resulted in structural problems. That beam is leaning like this because the foundation has been partially undermined because we've had drainage problems. The Glens, as I love to call them, have been already working hard in the courtyard on doing cheap alleviation of drainage, but there's much work to be done. As Glenn mentioned, our retention ponds, they fill with sediment over time, and so they are not compliant. We basically, every time it rains here, our retention ponds are not receiving sufficient water, and water is going out into the street, which is not supposed to happen. So we are violating environmental laws, if you want to put it to a point. And I don't think any of us want to do that. So this, to a large extent, is about compliance as well as, preserving the integrity of our buildings. So all of this sort of regrading, French draining, and so on is associated with that kind of thing.
There may be a little bit of, I don't want to ascribe all of the problems with the foundation to just drainage. I wasn't here when this building was constructed, but having worked with FDOT, I know that certain density requirements need to be met before a foundation is put down. And I don't know if anybody around here knows, if those foundation requirements were met when this building was constructed. So we could be looking at excess settlement. We could be looking at maybe the pond was not designed properly so that the grade away from the building allowed the seepage into the retention pond itself, which would have contributed to the building settling some as well. So we must really consider whether doing something that failed in the past is what we want to go forward with as well. These are some of the decisions and discussions we're having in buildings and grounds currently. Sure enough.
Thanks, Glenn. Everything has nuance, doesn't it?
Here before we ever, someone, the Baptist, somebody built it,
Right.
so.
It was here before retention ponds were required.
Leading right into it.
Yeah.
They were the building.
Any other drainage talk? This is sort of a large category that refers to just repair to facilities and increasing our capacity to do our thing and to carry out our mission. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a conversation where someone says, our water supply is inadequate. I just used the bathroom and it took the toilet 5 minutes to fill up. It's because, as Larry taught me decades ago, this entire campus is on one home residential water supply line. So we're going to fix that, for goodness sake. So that conversation will be in the past, but it costs a lot of money to do that. Kitchen. There's been lots of talk about kitchen. This is sort of an essential level of work on the kitchen, which basically is bringing back up to speed and operation the kitchen pretty much as it is. New appliances, enhancing storage, probably putting a dishwasher in there, but not sort of a full-blown order of magnitude increase in kitchen capacity. Okay, so this is sort of the baseline level of kitchen renovation. But it certainly would be helpful. So many HVAC. We've talked about HVAC ad nauseum. The office wing and sanctuary will be due for roofs soon. There's just a couple $1,000 on sort of catching up on vegetation management so that the weekly work that happens is just maintenance. Every morning, you know, we all trip over Tristan and Holden as we're going to our seats. And thank goodness they're there, but maybe moving them back into an AV booth in that storage room will then increase movement and room in the sanctuary for people to worship. Papati is heading some hard work to better understand storage on campus and is doing some great thinking with others on how to use our seminar rooms in a wise way for both storage, workroom, and meeting space. So A, B, and C are all sort of in that plan and in that narrative. Questions about anything on this list that you'd like folks to address?
I had a question that just came to my mind. Andy's old office, what are the plans for that? I know you won't put in, but
Question was, what are the plans for Andy's old office?
I don't know yet. At the moment, we sometimes have, you know, small meetings in it, but we will likely, as we continue to figure out what staffing reconfigurations might be done over the next little bit. I mean, but I imagine it'll be used as an office space at some juncture. Julia is over here, correct? In the education wing, which is great for when she's with the kids, but she also is sometimes like far away from us, it feels. Philip doesn't have office space. You know, anyway, there's a variety of folks who could use it. So no decisions have been made about that.
I'm surprised neither of you have moved into it. It's a really nice office. Phoebe, did you? Yeah, Phoebe had a comment.
I just want to clarify on the last two lines mentioning the seminars for storage and meeting space. We're actually taking a look campus-wide at any spaces that we can remove some old, well-loved stuff in an appropriate way and repurpose spaces everywhere we can find a spot.
Thanks, Phoebe. Really appreciate your work on that. Anyone else? Don't want to talk about air conditioners or, okay.
Can we have HVAC birthday parties?
Many candles on some of those units. This is an accessibility category. I think the last person to use the chairlift up into the youth room was my son Holden when he had a broken leg, and that was 13 years ago or something like that. And that chairlift is broken now. So we have, the youth room is not accessible. Sanctuary altar access is makeshift accessible, and one of the ramp is blocking one of the exits to the sanctuary. So that needs to be done correctly. We need to have modern accessibility to all parts, certainly of our worship space, and then redesign and renovation of bathrooms so that they are fully accessible as well.
I think give the microphone to Glenn.
Okay.
He needs to say a piece about accessibility in the first
This is all structural, structure related. It isn't related to the outside. And I think, I don't know if this should be amended, but it would sure help to explain that it doesn't stop at the door. There are very strict standards, both inside and even outside. And an example of why I'm carrying this, there is a maximum 1/4 inch difference between a pavement joint from one slab to the next. If it is exceeded, it's easy for characters like me to stub a toe, and luckily I fell into the grass. But then we're also responsible for our parishioners and our visitors, and open if there would be any risk for a lawsuit. So we could expand this and make it more informative, or we could leave it in the parking lot and maybe the courtyard, but I think it makes sense to at least address it in a simple bullet.
I think that's probably an important note for this committee to add, as just to make sure that we address external accessibility as well. That's a good point. Anyone else? Okay. Safety. This speaks primarily to updating doors and locking systems. There were 2 police officers waiting for us 2 weeks ago. Was it 1 week ago? The longest week. And that was after we changed our locks. So this is something that's needed in terms of modernization. Hospitality. So lots of painting, replacing decades-old carpet, and flooring. So this is sort of similar types of things that were done, for instance, in the children's wing, to sort of say, we now have a space that we're proud for our children, or to welcome visitors' children to. We want to make sure that the rest of our campus is that way for anybody we welcome, and for ourselves. Okay. Those were the essentials. Okay. These are our visionary projects. And it's sort of a catch-all kind of thing for things that the committee brainstormed or came up with in conversations with many people, and it includes a lot of things. You know, if we really, as a congregation felt we were pressed for space, Carol said the best path forward is a second story, which is expensive. Okay. This is an important and interesting number. Buildings and Grounds, put pencil to paper and said, what would be the true annual contribution essentially to capital reserves necessary to have a full maintenance and replacement schedule for everything. That number is about $160,000. So about 4 times what we put in this year. So one possibility is that we say, hey, let's get a head start on that and fund a year's worth of that out of the capital campaign. So that was what that was. Courtyard redesign, this is sort of over and above sort of the minimalist drainage and maybe some accessibility issues, but really sort of fully redoing the courtyard in a major way. Yeah, Glenn, could you briefly describe that?
I know it's a frustrating range if you're doing work on your home, that this probably isn't good for planning. Part of the dilemma for us, especially in the courtyard, is it is entirely the vision of the individuals as to what it could be. And there are from one end of the spectrum to the other, it could be, don't do too much. We can, fix some things and let's get it the essentials, and we have it the way it is. And then run the range to those that have visions of wonderful things happening, or at least active things happening. A couple of examples were, well, if we could only serve dinners or lunches outside, we would need to have a lot more facilities for that. And that was perhaps part of the commercial kitchen stuff. So in a little bit of defense of what might be seen as a ridiculous range, it really comes down to some visioning that we really ought to have as to what we want it to be. And actually, to a certain extent, I would sure like to have some vision discussion as where the church is going. Because if we want to grow, then probably our facilities ought to have a direction of where we're going. If we choose to be more conservative and not grow too much, well, then we can kind of pare down the other things. But if you want to put a vision in your mind, the range of 100,000 would be not too different from what we have now. Maybe some newer furniture, a real thorn in my side. I didn't fall here, but I think the opportunity for falling is quite evident. And we don't know how many people don't use our courtyard because of the risk it provides. And so we could do a short range and low range. We could do something very extensive, but the question is what meets our vision for the church, and then the courtyard should follow. Maybe redesign is a little scary. Maybe it's repurposing. I don't know. Anyway.
Thanks, Glenn. This is the option where we say we want a kitchen with substantially more capacity than we have now. Maybe at a capacity that enables us to rent to much larger gatherings and weddings and so on. And this sort of reflects what would be required to do that over and above that 75K. Obviously, we would do one or the other,
For our own congregation when we get it. Like right now, we always bring in that more, you can't cook for 200 people in that kitchen.
Yeah, Bromley's, for those online, Bromley's pointing out we can't cook for 200 in the existing kitchen or in the $75,000 kitchen. It'll still be a 4-burner stove.
What we heard in Buildings and Grounds was that one of the pros of having a commercial kitchen is that it would make the space more rentable. And if we are looking as a church to have outside funding help with our budget process, then that's a factor in that commercial kitchen, that it would make it more attractive for rentals. And I do want to say that obviously, if money comes in, let's say we get all of this money for Buildings and Grounds, if the church has decided that they do want to have a commercial kitchen, then we aren't going to go in there and renovate it. We're not going to do that twice. So just keep that in mind.
Good to reinforce that.
I didn't do my kitchen until the cabinets were falling apart and the appliances were broken. I haven't noticed, maybe I just didn't notice, but I haven't noticed there being cabinets falling apart or appliances not working. Where, I'm thinking, why are we doing this before we've reached that point? I get the idea of maintenance and all, but to me, the cabinets seem fine and the appliances are just.
Couple of examples. All the burners on the stove don't work. Every year when we do chili lunch, I borrow Larry's generator because we cannot plug in enough crock pots in the kitchen without constantly throwing the one 15-amp breaker probably that services all the outlets in the kitchen. So yeah, it's long in the tooth in some other ways. You're right, the cabinets are not bad.
And then it gets another thing, when you talk about long and tooth, we did freezer, it hadn't broken yet, but it was, it's 23 years old and it's all the stuff in there I don't want to thaw out. So it's sort of like, okay, I think at 23 years, we'll just buy a new one rather than risk a big mess later.
Okay. The final item on this sort of visionary list is another array of solar panels that would go on the sanctuary roof.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, please.
Carol and Lisa and I meet regularly, and as we've been examining the electrical bills once but that sort of thing, and then comparing that to, we have two different meters here, one that services everything from the office west, and then one for the sanctuary unit. We obviously don't use the sanctuary that much, and so that bill is a lot lower. And so we were just raising the question in one of our last meetings as to whether that is really cost effective to put solar panels on the sanctuary roof. And Jeff, we would like for you to maybe, I don't know, we'll talk to you about it because you know so much about solar. And so one of the other things that was mentioned when we were putting the roofs on here, there was a group of people who felt like we should put metal on because that was more environmentally friendly. And Carol explained that because of the, oh, what's the word? Try to learn this language, but all the various pitches here that putting metal on was not economically advisable. But we said at the time that would be a perfect thing to do on the sanctuary roof when we come to redo the sanctuary roof. But she said the pitch on the sanctuary roof is so steep that you would not want to put solar on top of a metal roof there because it would be too hard to do the maintenance on it. So that's something to think about. Do we really want to go with solar for the sanctuary roof, or would it be better to think in terms of a metal roof for cost? So we don't know the answers to that, but somebody who could do the research on that would be great.
And I think that, that's a great example of how, should our goal extend into projects like this, none of this is going to be just done like that. That's why I made sure to include, this will involve congregation engaged kinds of processes because we have to make sure that those investments are appropriate and a good use of our dollars. So again, really appreciate that nuance. That is all the slides that I have. So are there other comments that folks would like to make? My email is always open to any of you. I can take it, whatever you have to say.
This has probably been said before, but it seems that if we decided to do a commercial kitchen, we would also have to really do something about the courtyard or liability issues if they're going to have big groups renting. And anyway, so they kind of go together in my mind.
And maybe we're there. I mean, we rent to many groups already. So certainly that exposure exists already. But yeah, it would be amplified if we had larger groups. Good point. Big lens.
Just a point I wanted to make, and it's a challenge we've had analyzing the situation. Part of the problem of stable walking is mulch and leaves. That's not so bad, but it's the roots within that. To remove roots of trees, especially older trees, it's hard to do. You can't say, well, I'm just going to cut these roots out. To remove enough to make it a stable place to walk on, we're probably taking a lot of roots out. We take a lot of roots out. We don't know whether those trees are going to make it. And none of us wants to give up the shade that we have. So one reason the number goes up so high in a courtyard, assuming we want to fix a lot of these things now, is we put in the appropriate number of trees, and knowing the importance our congregation has in shade as quickly as possible, we're probably putting in trees that are sizable. And we don't roll big trees in under our shade canopy. They're brought in by, if they're really big and expensive, they're brought in by a crane. Now, I'm not saying we go there. My point is that range of visions. And if we were to take out one of these really big trees that is questionable if we should keep it or not, if we went that direction, we probably need a crane to pull out the huge trunk pieces and to put in a sizable tree in its place. And I'm not saying it's a 30-foot tall tree in a 20-foot span. It's smaller than that, and that alone will still cost thousands and thousands of dollars than the cost of the crane. So my point is only this: these simple things that we're trying to grapple with, and one of trying to make a stable footing on what we use, has other complications, and the dominoes start to fall. I'm not worried about it. It's just that I think about, if Liz wants me to speak in front of the congregation about these, I'm going to wear a bulletproof vest, I think, because I don't want to be the guy saying that, well, these trees need to come down, but we might have to, in our job as a committee, is going to, how can we replace it with minimal pain of loss of shade?
Oh, that laurel oak.
The laurel oak has a double risk, and that is scary for the sanctuary.
Thank you for your expertise.
I'd kind of like to speak, and I don't usually do this, for one of our members who's not here today, and I think he still has COVID, and that would be Eric Smith. He brought up a really good point at our last meeting, that in all of these discussions, we don't want to lose focus on purpose of our facility and our spiritual mission within the church. I know that both of our ministers and whatever are quite intent on maintaining that. But Eric gave a really good example of some folks who apparently is in a park and whatever out in Paynes Prairie. I think they had a beautiful facility, and they started to go ahead and try to have wedding receptions out there to raise more funds and so on. And it just got to the point where it got out of control, and they weren't able to concentrate on their normal functions because they were so busy worrying about these other functions that they were having to raise money. I thought it was a really, really good point and whatever, and something that we should all bear in mind and whatever as we go forward.
Yep. Elda wanted to make a comment pointing out that we may need to prioritize the locks and doors issues given, and I think we probably have the capability to do that within capital reserves and maybe budget. I don't want to speak for others, but
I just want to back up here, the courtyard. I don't know, probably no one but Carol and I paid attention, but when you had the slide up for the capital campaign thing that you showed at the congregational meeting last week, there was a picture of the courtyard, and it was a picture of that laurel oak that was there when the courtyard, it was about, 8 or 10 inches in diameter, And so what we've talked about, because we know everybody loves trees, we all love trees. We don't like to take them down, unless they're dying or something. No, not laurel oaks. No, we don't love laurel oaks. So that laurel oak really is old. It was probably about a 20-year-old tree when this courtyard was developed 30 some years ago. So it's about at the end of its lifespan. So, but the problem is, these are trees that have, and what Eric said was that we can plant trees, shade trees that have deep root systems, that don't have superficial root systems, that aren't going to be buckling our sidewalks or making, if we decide we want more stable surface out there for people to walk or people who have accessibility issues. You know, if we want more stable surface, then we want trees that have deeper root systems that aren't gonna buckle all that. So we're just considering all those things.
I want to thank everybody for coming. A couple of closing comments. If you get an inquiry to participate in the feasibility study, please do if you have time. If you don't receive an inquiry, please don't take it personally. We are trying to, as I said, sort of cast the net as broadly as possible. Although I am looking around the rooms and ticking off, these are some very dedicated people here. You took roll. Thank you. So thank you all very much.